Good evening, Shalom Aleichem. We're here to commemorate the fourth Yartzeit of our dear Chaver and whole member, Rabbi Dovid Sharfman, Chronos HaKavracha. Commemoration is meant for the purpose of, number one, to be inspired by his hanhagos when we remind ourselves of what he was, what his life was all about, and the inspiration he continued to share with all of us. That's a tremendous chus for the nifter. And number two, to be inspired and to learn Divrei Torah, which Rabbi Sharfman definitely represented to a tremendous degree. His vast bekias in Gemara, in Chazal, in Halacha was phenomenal. And that's why we asked someone to give a shir on Hilchos Pesach, that we should all be inspired and follow through, and all the mitzvahs we perform should be a schus for his neshama. When we think of Rabbi Sharfman, I think of someone who was everything, who was such an essential individual in the yeshiva, whose tremendous efforts on behalf of the yeshiva made the yeshiva blossom and grow, and whose shoes are very hard to fill, if not impossible. He was a Rebbe to Talmidim. Talmidim loved him. He was there for them for everything, their gashmius needs, their ruchnius needs, everything you can think of, he was there for them. That's why you speak to Talmidim nowadays, they still remember 4 years later very vividly the hargoshas, the feelings, the attachment, the emotional love that they expressed for him as if he's around today. What is it? I was trying to think of what is the common denominator, what caused all these many facets which he was blessed with. What holds it all together? And it comes to mind in this past week's parsha. The Torah talks about Klal Yisrael with Egel Azov. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lech rei kishiches amcha. Go back down the mountain. Go to Klal Yisrael because your your nation has been very destructive. Kishiches amcha. The Dasken explains what does that mean. It wasn't necessarily Avodah Zarah, but they wanted a manik, they wanted a leader to replace Moshe Rabbeinu, who they thought was not there anymore. Says the Daskenim, V'hem shichasu, shechlifu manig v'dabor asher nosati lohem. They exchanged the manig, which I gave to them, for someone else. And the question, the very obvious question is, what does that mean? The Yetzer Hara, as Rashi tells us, misled them, convinced them that Moshe Rabbeinu was dead, he was away. Obviously, we do encourage Klal Yisrael to have a manig. If there's no manig, if they have another manig, how can they be accused of not having a manig and being machlev to exchange for someone else? There was no manig. My Rabbi, Rabbi Nachibus, explains that when if somebody has a tremendous hakara connection to his Rebbe, to his manig, he would go the extra mile and make sure every stone will not be left unturned, to make sure the manig, if you think he's not there, to make sure he's not there. Klal Yisrael at this time was lacking in that recognition, that connection to their Rebbe, to their manig, to Moshe Rabbeinu, which if it would have been stronger, they would have thought twice, would have thought 3 times, maybe 4 times, and realized that this is only Yetzer Hara, and Moshe Rabbeinu is still around. I think Rabbi Dovid, our dear colleague and friend, and whole member of Dovid Sharfman, was that type of person. His connection to Torah, his connection to his Rebbe, to his manig was so powerful. He emulated him in every single thing he did. The love for Talmidim, the care for Talmidim, the concern for every facet of their lives, all their needs. And for the community at large, the shiurim he gave us all manifestation of how much he gleaned and how connected he was to Har Sinai through his Rebbe, through his Rebbe's Rebbe, way back to Har Sinai. That's what I think made Dovid Sharfman who he was. We should be zocha to be inspired by the words we have. We're here tonight. We first have the schus to have a shir on Hilchos Pesach from Rabbi Ephraim Friedman Shlita, the Dayan of Kol Zichron Michal of North Miami Beach, the Rosh Kol of Ezra, Franco Sfardi Kol of Aventura, a shir on Hilchos Pesach. Rabbi Sharfman was very close to Rabbi Friedman, Yibodel Chaim Shlita, and he used to ask him many shilas as a posek, as a chaver, and the yeshiva was very close to him. And it's now our privilege to hear from Rabbi Ephraim Friedman.
Good evening, Morav Rabosai. As we are approaching the Yartzeit of Rabbi Dovid Sharfman, Zichrono Livracha. It is a great schus to be able to share some Divrei Torah with you, Divrei Torah in Yonei Hilchos Pesach, L'zecher u'le'ilu nishmaso. Just want to begin by saying that the entire South Florida community, Jewish community, really owes Rabbi Sharfman, Rabbi Dovid Zal, a tremendous debt of gratitude, as he was so instrumental in helping the yeshiva Teres Chaim, grow and become a extremely prominent, significant Makom Torah in the community. And he had hashpah on so many mishpachos, so many talmidim who came from families from all over, but many of them from local mishpachos, local Miami mishpachos. And as the years go on and his former talmidim grow older, mature, get married, have their own families, and are mishpia l'tov on their mishpachos, in a good part due to the chinuch which they received from him, and the hashpah, and the hadracha, and the hisayrus that they received from him. So his chusim continue to grow and grow as the years go on, and as the numbers grow, the number of people that are affected by the imprint that he made on the community, the impact that he had on his talmidim. So his chusim, of course, grow together with that, and there's no end to that. And my mishpacha is personally indebted to Rav Dovid for the role he played in the yeshiva and the role he played in developing my own mishpacha and in bringing about a whole series of events which resulted in what we have today in our being located in this community and be able to be part of this community and benefit from the wonderful services, Torah services that are available here. So it's my hope that the words that I say now, the Divrei Torah, will serve in part to be an Ilui Neshama for him and a Nechama for the whole beautiful mishpacha which he left behind. The Magen Avraham in Simin Taf Mem Zayin in Hilchos Pesach, Magen Avraham Sifka and Chav Ches, is discussing the halacha of chometz, of vinegar which is inherently kosher lePesach, but which goes into a kli. It's drawn up in a keli, which is a chametzdika keli, and it sits in that keli for a certain amount of time. And the Magen Avraham discusses at what point will that chometz, will that vinegar, become unfit for use on Pesach. Based on what? Well, based on there's a concept of kavush kamavushal, which means that we know typically bishul, cooking, or the transfer of tam either from one food to another, or from a keli to a food, or food to a keli, typically happens through some form of heat. But there is another concept which doesn't involve heat, and that is the concept of kvisha, or kavush, and which tells us that if something cold is sitting in a keli for a certain amount of time, so either that mashke, that liquid in the keli, could have an effect in the keli. So if that mashke is a mashke shel iser, it's treif, it could become nivla, it could become absorbed into the keli and make the keli treif. Or the other way around, if the keli is treif and the mashke is kosher, there's also the possibility that at a certain point, through the process of kavisha, of just soaking, kavisha basically that they're soaking together, meaning this mashke is soaking in the keli, it could draw blias out of the keli and potentially make the mashke usher. Now, typically, that takes 24 hours. Typically, the din of kavush with cold food or cold mashke, cold liquid, only is a factor after 24 hours. If you have, for example, a treif food sitting in kosher liquid for 24 hours, cold liquid, so at the end of 24 hours, the liquid absorbs from the tam of the food and the liquid becomes usher. The other way around, if you have kosher food sitting in some sort of treif cold treif liquid, So up to 24 hours, it's no problem. You just take it out, take out the kosher food and wash it off well, and you can eat it. But if it sits there for 24 hours, then it already absorbs kavish kamavushal at 24 hours. And it absorbs tam from the treifa liquid, and it's no longer something that could be consumed simply by washing it off. It's treif. But there are certain things where the process of kavush is much quicker. It doesn't take 24 hours, or at least one thing, and possibly two. The Shulchan Aruch says in Yeridei, Siman Kuf Hey, Seif Aleph, after it discusses the basic din of kavush that it takes me'es la'es, 24 hours, the Mechaber goes on to say, Ve'imu kavush b'soch tzir, but if the kosher food is kavush in tzir is the liquid, the sharp, salty liquid that emerges from food, from meat, for example, when it's sitting in melach, it's sitting in salt. So the tzir is this sharp, bloody liquid. So if the heter is sitting in the tzir, and I'll skip 2 words for a moment and come back. So then it says, Imshah kadesh yitnenu al ha'or v'yarsiach v'yaschel espashel hariyel k'mavushel. Then the shear that it takes for it to be considered mavushel, so that the kosher food absorbs tam from this treifet sear, is much less than 24 hours. It's a shear which is called kadesh yala al arvi arsiach, which in the poskim discuss how long that is, but typically the most common sheet is that it's 18 minutes, a lot less than 24 hours. Some say it's even less than that, maybe 6 minutes, maybe somewhere in between, but it's a very short period of time, relatively. So let's just call it 18 minutes. Instead of having to use the term, let's call it 18 minutes. If the kosher food is sitting in the tzir, this treifa blood, for 24, salty blood, for 18 minutes, it's bolea, it absorbs tam from the tzir, absorbs the tzir and becomes treif. Now, but then there's another case. I said I skipped 2 words. Let's go back. It says the Mechaber again, v'mukavish b'soch tzir o b'soch chometz, or if it's sitting in chometz, if it's sitting in vinegar, then also it absorbs after only the shear of the small shear, the 18-minute shear. So that means what the Mechaber tells us is that the din of kvisha, when we're dealing with chometz, dealing with vinegar, is an 18-minute shear rather than a 24-hour shear. Okay, now based on that, says the Magen Avraham, if you put a kosher lepesach chometz, kosher lepesach vinegar, into a chometz keli, cold, they're both cold, the keli's cold and the vinegar's cold, but it sits there for 18 minutes, it becomes treif. If the kli, says the Magen Avraham, if the kli was a ben yomo, meaning if the kli had been used for chometz within the previous 24 hours, and then you soak this chometz vinegar, you put the vinegar into this kli and it sits there for 18 minutes, the vinegar becomes chometz thick and cannot be used for Pesach. Now, the Chok Yaakov, and followed by Rabbi Kiva Eger and the Gilyon Shulchan Aruch, have a kasha on the Magen Avraham. And their kasha is that Magen Avraham, if you're being machmer for the shita of the Mechaber, meaning we said that the Mechaber in Yeridei says this, that chometz is like tzir in that it has a accelerated shear, kvisha, an 18-minute shear. And the reason I'm saying that, you see that we'll see soon that the Shach disagrees and says that it's only tzir and not chometz. But the Magen Avraham rejects the Shach, and the Magen Avraham directly, explicitly, and the Magen Avraham goes with the shita of the Mechaber that chometz is bolei in only 18 minutes. So frek the Chok Yaakov and frek Rabbi Kiva Eger, if you're treating chometz as a davar charif, as a sharp thing, which is bolea even cold through kvisha after only 18 minutes, so why then, Magen Avraham, did you say it's only talking about when it's sitting in a kli which is a ben yomo from chametz? Don't we know the rule that a davar charif, something which is a sharp thing, when it is bolei tam from a keli, even if it's bolei tam from a keli which is an eino ben yomo, it still becomes treif, or let's say in this case chametzik, because even though normally food that's bolei tam, which is eino ben yomu, does not become treif. Eino ben yomu tam can't make a food treif. But if it gets absorbed into a davar charif, there's a rule that it's mechal yalei l'shvach, that the davar charif, the sharp food, converts the tam from being pogum to being no longer pogum. So, frek Chag Yaakov and Kiveger, so Magen Avraham, why do you say that this halacha about the chometz, the vinegar, sitting in the chometz stick keli for 18 minutes becomes chometz stick, only is true in the case when it sits in the when it was placed in the keli, which is a ben yomo for chometz, from chometz. L'chayra, it should be true even if it's a keli which is not a ben yomo from chometz. And as a result of this kasha, the Sefer Tosfos Shabbos is also bothered by the kasha, is actually Magia in the Magen Avraham. And he adds, instead of the Magen Avraham reading in a Kli Shehu Ben Yomo, he adds in the words, Afilu Eino, Afilu Eino Ben Yomo. And if you look at many versions of the Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchas Pesach, Taf Mem Zayin, Magen Avraham, Sivkon and Chav Ches, you will see that it actually says there, Afilu Eino Ben Yomo. In some of them, they put those words in brackets. In some of them, they just added it in. But it's based on the Hagah of the Tosfos Shabbos. Rabbi Kiveger didn't have that gersa. The Chag Yaakov didn't have the gersa. They had the gersa of Davka Ben Yomo. but they leave it shver. Why should it Davka be Ben Yomo? So Tosfos Shabbos says, it's shver. We have to be Magia. But a number of the Achronim want to be Miyashiv. The old Gersa, no need to be Magia. We can explain the Magen Avraham the way it's written, that it's Davka Kli Ben Yomo. And why is that? So, first of all, this concept that I mentioned, that a Davar Charif that's Bolei Tam, even Tam Pogum, converts it to be Tam L'Shvach and becomes Usser, where does that come from? Now, by the way, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this concept because everybody knows that when you're dealing in your kitchen with a Davar Charif, such as an onion or garlic or something, everybody knows that it's a big problem if you cut it with a knife, a fleishach knife, even if it's an Eino Ben Yomo, you know at least to ask a shaila. You know that, I cut it with a fleishach knife, then I mixed it with milchiks, or I want to mix it with milchiks, and you think, and you were told that even if it's a knife Eino Ben Yomo, it could be a problem. It's a concern. It's certainly a lechatchila. So we're familiar with this concept. But where does this concept come from? So it comes from the Gemara, which says it by one particular davar charv, one particular case called chiltis. Chiltis is some sort of very particularly sharp vegetable. The identity is not necessarily so clear what it is, but it's something very, very sharp. And on that, the Gemara says that if you cut a chiltis with a treifa knife, even the treifa knife was not used for tarfas within 24 hours, the chiltis becomes treif. Now, in the Rishonim, there is a machlokes if that concept applies broader than chiltis. Rabbeinu Baruch, the Sefer HaTruma learns that it's not just a din in chiltis, but it applies across the board. It applies to a snow, to a radish, another dvarim charifim, that if they're bolei tam, even tam pogum, they turn that tam into tam l'shvach and they become usher. But this is a machlokas Rishonim. The Maharam Mirottenberg, famous Maharam, Rabbi of the Rosh, quoted extensively in the Rishonim and Halacha L'Mais all over. He holds differently. He holds that it's only by chiltis. It's not, chiltis is very, very sharp. Other things that are sharp, they have the din that they could pull out tam from a keli, and we won't apply the kul of nat bar nat, which won't go into that now. But they don't have the din that they could convert tam pogum into tam l'shvach. Okay, so zakt a number of achronim. Let's particularly say the machzah shekel. There are many reasons why the Magen Avraham held that even if we're going to be machmer with the chometz in the keli, that if it sits there just for 18 minutes in the chometz stick kli, it becomes chometz stick, but we're only going to be machmer by a ben yomo. First of all, not all Rishonim agree that by a Eino Ben Yomo becomes a shvach when you're not dealing with chiltis. When you're dealing with anything else, any other davar charif, many Rishonim hold that it doesn't change it into be tam l'shvach. That's one point. And another point, there's this whole din that it's boleya after 18 minutes is also not bar, as I mentioned before. The Mechaber says this. The Mechaber in Siman Kufay in Yeridea says that chometz is like tzir, that it's boleya after only 18 minutes. But the shach on the spot there, the shach is cholik, and the shach is cholik with the Mechaber, and he's doichel the din in the Mechaber. He says it's only tzir. It's only tzir. Now, where does that din come from? By the way, that din comes from the Rush. The Rush is the one who says this by tzir. And the Mechaber understands there's lav davka tzir, who adin chometz. Zok the shach, no, it's not lav davka. It's not davka tzir, it's davka tzir. It does not apply to chometz. So even if the Magen Avraham doesn't hold like the shach, he holds to be machmir that the din that even chometz could be bolei after 18 minutes. But he knows it's a machlokes, so it's already so the Magen Avraham, number one, he's being machmir he's being machmir to say not like the shach. And also, even if you hold that it's boleya after a short amount of time, it's not pashut at all. Even by tzir, it's not pashut that it's boleya from a keli after 18 minutes. Meaning to say, it could be the din of the rush that tzir is the din that kavish occurs with tzir after only 18 minutes is only talking about with another food. If you have some sort of food sitting in the tzir for 18 minutes, that food becomes treif. If you have a carrot sitting in tzir for 18 minutes, so the carrot becomes treif. But tzir sitting in a keli, to say that the keli, that the tzir is goes into the keli, is nivla into the keli, pulls out time from the keli, or puts in time to the keli after 18 minutes, that's not so pashut. That's a machlokas. If you look back in your Adei Simon Samach Tes, both the Magen of both the Taz and the Shach there, the Taz, I believe it's, I said Magen of Ram because I believe it's Taz, Sivka, and Mem Aleph. The Taz over there, Sivka and Mem Aleph, and the Shach over there, they both say that this whole din of tzir being boleya after kavish after 18 minutes doesn't apply with a keli. It only applies with foods. But the keli, it takes 24 hours. Oh, so now we have this Magen of Ram that's being machmer after 18 minutes. First of all, he's being machmer with chometz, which is itself a machlokas. Maybe it only applies to tzir. Second of all, he's being machmer even in a keli, which is another machlokas, because both the Taz and Shach in Samach Tes say it doesn't apply. The Drisha there says it does apply to a keli. And the Magen of Ram himself, earlier in Tefem Zayin, again, rejects that Shach, the Shach that's makel by a keli, and he says no. He holds it's even from a keli. That tzir is believed from a keli. So in Chanami he rejects that shach, but that's a chumrah. So we have 3 chumras already. Again, 3 chumras. A chumrah to say that tzir is tzir, that altogether the chometz is beleya after only 18 minutes. A chumrah to say even if it is beleya after 18 minutes, but to say that it's beleya from a keli after 18 minutes, could be that's not even true by tzir. And thirdly, even if to say that it should be able to be boleya tam pogim and converted into tam l'shvach, that's also a machlokas, big machlokas rishonim, as we said before. So zog the machs, and then there's a fourth side, but we'll leave out a fourth side cooler. But let's just deal with those 3. So zog the machs shekel, the Magen of Ram knew what he was saying. He purposely wrote only in a kli ben yom, because even though he's going to be machmir that it's boleya tam after 18 minutes, the chometz is boleya tam, it becomes chometz after 18 minutes, but he's only being machmir by a kli that it's a ben yomo, not by a ben yomo. And if you look on the Gilgim, the Dogam Revava also goes with that mahalich, and as Tamiyashi, the Magen of Ram, and the Chasam Sofer quotes the Dogam Revava. So we have many achronim that say the Magen of Ram is not shver. Leave it the way it is. But we have a difficulty if we look in the Mishnah Berurah. We can't learn Hilchas Pesach without opening a Mishnah Berurah. So open the Mishnah Berurah, please. Siman Taf Mem Zayin, Sif Kata and Ayin Aleph. The Mishnah Berurah is over there, brings down this din of the Magen Avram that chometz, vinegar, in a chometz stick keli becomes chometz stick, even though it's cold after a certain period of time. But how does the Mishnah Berurah say the din? The Mishnah Berurah says it only happens after 24 hours. Not like the Magen Avram, that it happens after 18 minutes. He's mekel, and the Yartzeit explains that he doesn't accept the Magen Avram's chumrah to be machmir with chometz after only 18 minutes. No, we'll leave that for tzir, 18 minutes. Chometz takes 24 hours. So the Mishnah Berurah, only if you have vinegar sitting in a chometz stick keli for 24 hours will it become chometz stick when it's cold. But then says, but the Mishnah Berurah says, but if it does sit there for 24 hours, even if the keli was in Eino ben Yomo, the chametz will become aser. So on the Nakuda where the Magen Avram was mekel, according to Machzah Shekel, etc., where the Magen Avram was mekel and said that it only applies by an Eino ben Yomo, the Mishnah Berurah is machmer and says this thing will apply even by a ben Yomo, but the Mishnah Berurah, on the other hand, is mekel that it takes 24 hours. So Frek the Chazon Ish, he says, he doesn't understand this Mishnah Berurah at all. He says, Mishnah Berurah, if you're already mekel, you're being more mekel than the Magen Avram, and you're saying that it doesn't happen. Chometz doesn't absorb time after 18 minutes. It takes 24 hours for chometz to absorb time from the keli. If you want to be mekel like that, fine, which is fine. Many achronim are mekel. But what's your makor then to be machmir after 24 hours to be machmir even on a keli that's an Eino ben Yomo? Meaning, how do you have a right, so to speak? How do you have a right to paskin and to be machmir that the chometz is mechal yelei l'shvach, that the chometz can convert the tam pogum with the tam l'shvach. In other words, and don't say, well, but that's because after 24 hours it can convert. No, the Mishnah Berurah is saying, maybe yes, but Pashtus no, because the Mishnah Berurah is saying that it takes 24 hours to absorb, to pull out anything from the walls of the keli. Just like if you had water sitting in a chametz keli, it would definitely, cold water, it would definitely take 24 hours till the water pulled out tam from the keli. And if you had any other liquid, so the Mishnah Berurah paskins who then if you have chometz, if you have vinegar, it takes 24 hours, like the Shach says in Yoreh De'ah, not like the Mechaber in Yoreh De'ah, but like the Shach in Yoreh De'ah Kufay. It takes 24 hours. So if the Mishnah Berurah is makel already, that we're not going to consider chometz charif vis-a-vis the din of pulling out tam after the short amount, the accelerated period of 18 minutes, so where does the Mishnah Berurah come to be machmir and say, but when it pulls out tam, even if it pulls out tam from any ben yomo, it'll turn into shvach? That itself is a very big chumrah. According to some Rishonim, that only happens by chiltis, and you're going to be machmir by chometz that it turns it into tam l'shvach after tam pogim becomes tam l'shvach. So the Chazon Ish doesn't understand this Mishnah Berurah, and he feels that the Mishnah Berurah is no makar for the way he paskin. So. I think, though, that we could just say very simply that maybe it's not so shver, this psak of the Mishnah Berurah, because just to put the different dinim in perspective, the din that chometz could be boleya after a short amount of time, the din that the Magen Avram is machmer on, that chometz could be boleya after a very short amount of time, whereas that din has no makar in Shas, because even seer, the salty, bloody liquid, which is boleh after 18 minutes, according to everyone, the Shach doesn't challenge that, even that's not from a Gemara, that's a rush. That's a rush at the end of Perek Kalabasar. And the rush only says it by tzir. The Shulchan Aruch extended it to chometz. So that din, the whole makar of that din is what I just said it is. So on that din, for the Mishnah Berurah to be makel and say, no, I'm not going to accept the chumrah of the Magen Avram that it takes, that it happens into 18 minutes, I'm only going to be machmir 24 hours, that's understandable. Mash'enkein, the din that a davar charif could change something from tam pogim, tam l'shvach, that it definitely is based on a Gemara. I mean, there's a Gemara that says such a thing happens by chiltis. And there are many Rishonim who say that it happens by not just by chiltis, but by all dvarim charifim. And that's brought in Shulchan Aruch. If you look in Yoreh De'ah Siman Tzadi Vav, the Mechaber brings it down as a Yesh Omrim in Sif Aleph, and then the Ramah brings it in Sif Gimel, that even by Davar Pogim, even Tam Pogim turns into Tam L'Shvach by other Dvarim Charifim, not Davka by Chiltis, by other Dvarim Charifim. So for the Mishnah Berurah to be Machmer on that Nakuda is Nishna Zayvait. It's not such a big Chiddush they should be Machmer on that. That din is based on has at least the Yesod in the Gemara, and many Rishonim say it applies to other things as well. So l'chara, just not saying any very big chiddush here, just putting together the pieces that l'chara it's hard to understand why the Chazon Ish should feel it's so tamua that the Mishnah Berurah would be, although he's makel on the one din and he says it takes 24 hours, not 18 minutes before chometz boleya, but on the other din it says when it is boleya, it's boleya. The tam, even tam pogum, which is boleya, will aser it because they turn to l'shvach. And just to maybe to add one bit of spice to it, I mean, it could be that the idea of being boleya, of kavish quickly, 18 minutes, is not so much because of charifus of the tzir. It's more that the tzir is considered like resichus, like there's a form of heat in there, like maliyah chareo kuroseach. So, and that's only by maliyah. That's not chometz. It's not kuroseach. So maybe that's what Mishpros. That's only by tzir. But by chometz in chanami, chometz is charif. Yes, chometz is very charif, and that's why when it is boleya, even if it's boleya tam pogum, it makes it aser because it turns to l'shvach. But it takes 24 hours to be boleya because it doesn't have that resichos aspect which the tzir has. So that's l'chara could be a simple pshat in Mishnah Berurah. Now, taking this to one other area of Hilchos Pesach, so whether or not you're with me at this point, or you want to sit down and think about it, or before it sinks in fully. But now we're going to shift to the Leil Seder. We all know about the Leil Seder. A little bit easier more familiar territory for maybe more of us. And I want to talk about your romaine lettuce leaves, which you may be using for maror. And there's a tshuva in the Minchas Yitzchak where he's addressed to a guy, Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rosh Shlomo Zalman had a ha'ara on the Madrech HaKashrus that the Badatz of the Eidach Hareidus put out, some years back. because the Eidach Haredis, when they were talking about preparing romaine lettuce for the Seder, they were discussing the idea that it's very problematic from a perspective of tolaim, of bugs, and it has to be cleaned very well if you're going to use romaine lettuce leaves, as we all know. And it mentioned in that madrich that you could put it in vinegar. Oh, here we go. Here's the connection. You could put the leaves into vinegar, but it says be careful not to leave them there too long, so they shouldn't become kavush, because the din is, it says in Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Pesach that maror, which is kavush, is not, you're not yotze with maror if it's mevushal or if it's kavush, because kavush is mevushal. This is in Siman Taf Ayin Gimel. In Seif Hey, it says avalo kavushim, velo shlukim, velo mevushalim. You're not yotze if it's kavush or if it's mevushal. So says the Madrich HaKashis, be careful. You could put it into vinegar, let it sit there a little bit, but don't let it sit there too long, because you don't want it to become kavush, and kavush kamavushal, and then it's a big shaila. There are mekilim, but it becomes a big shaila if you could be yotze, with moro that way. So Rosh Shlomo Zalman had a ha'ara. He said, Rosh Shlomo Zalman says, if you ask me, you shouldn't put it anywhere near vinegar. Forget about not too long. It shouldn't touch vinegar. Why not? Because the same halacha that I mentioned before in Siman Kuf Hey, that said, when the Mechaber says that something which sits in vinegar for even a short period of time, which we're calling 18 minutes, becomes kavush kamavushal, it says, then the Mechaber goes on and says, what happens if it sits in vinegar for less than this amount of time? This is again Kuf Hey Sif Aleph. Ubepachas mishir zeh lo neser el kadei klipa. If it's less than that shear, it only becomes asur kadei klipa. Oh, so 1 second. Less than that shear, I mean less than 18 minutes, or like I mentioned, some say it's not even 18 minutes. Some say the shear is 6 minutes. Less than that, let's call it for a moment the 6-minute shear. It becomes asur if you put in vinegar kadei klipa. So you're going to put your romaine lettuce leaves into vinegar and let them sit there for how long? 2 minutes, 3 minutes? The whole leaf is only about a kadei klipa. How thick is a klipa? Means peel, right? A kadei klipa is the smallest amount you could peel off from something and get in one piece. So how much thicker is a romaine lettuce leaf than a kadei klipa? Maybe not at all, maybe barely. But so if you're going to have it soaking in vinegar for even less than that, the smaller shear, even less than the accelerated shear, it still becomes asur kadei klipa. So if it's mevushal kadei klipa, from this, then you basically have nothing left. Your romaine lettuce leaf is now mevushal. So Rosh Shlomo Zalman, we should stay away from vinegar. You want to cleave the leaves. Try, and he recommends maybe you shouldn't use the leaves. Maybe you should use the stalks, which are less buggy, easier to clean, etc., etc. So Dayan Weiss in the Tshuva in Minchas Yitzchak, and for those of you who want the Maramakom, it is Chelik Zayin Siman Lamed Aleph. So Dayan Weiss wants to defend what they wrote, what the Eidach Haredis wrote in the Madrich. He was the Badatz, he was the Abezdin of the Eidach Haredis. So he explains that he says, look, we have a very serious problem here. Bugs in tolam, in romaine lettuce, is a very serious problem, and we need to take serious methods of dealing with. Make sure they're on when it comes into your mouth and Seder night. So he says there are mekilim b'chlal, even kavush, even if it's kavush, there are mekilim that it's kosher. And let's just how else does he defend? He says kivin sheyesh chashash gadol shel toloim. This is called a b'di'evid. If b'di'evid, you could be able to say this is called b'di'evid. So it's not kedai to use them without using vinegar to clean. He says, if you could use the stalks, he said, I agree. I'm not arguing with Shlomo Zalman. I agree with you. If you could avoid it and use the stalks, but if you have to use the leaves, then I really feel you should still use vinegar. Just don't keep it there too long. So Shlomo Zalman responded and said, okay, we're not really arguing. We both agree it's better to use the stalks. He says, but I want to make one more point, says Shlomo Zalman. You can find this also in the Halicha Shlomo on Pesach, Perek Zayin, Dvar Halacha Mem Aleph. He says, there's another concern, besides Kavush Kamavushal. There's a din that you're not allowed, the maror can't have any other tam in it. You can't have a foreign taste in the maror. So, Bishlam, if you kovish it in water, even if it's there 24 hours, you can say, b'di'evid, maybe it's okay. Well, we make it on the din of kavush kamavushal. But here it's not really just kavush kamavushal. If it's mavushal in the chometz, that means it's bolea the tam of the chometz. Chometz is tam, has a taste. It's not tasteless like water. Vinegar has a taste to it. So memela, you forget about this, the technical din of mavushal, but your romaine leaf now has a different taste. It doesn't just taste like romaine lettuce. It tastes like romaine lettuce. Vinegar style romaine lettuce, and that's a big problem. And again, he says the whole thing is so if it's bolea kadei klipa, it's in a very short amount of time, undefined short amount of time. So that's it. Your whole thing tastes like something else. So like another cheshbon, another reason why you should really try to avoid it if you can. That's what Shlomo Zalman says. Okay, so this din that chometz is nivla after a very short period of time has relevance legabe the kashrus of your food for Pesach, legabe issa v'heter, and has relevance legabe your becoming the mitzvah of the Seder, the mitzvah of Maror. Now, nowadays, I believe the kashrus organizations, although they will strongly caution you to clean your romaine lettuce properly, they don't recommend necessarily using vinegar. The other way, you can look up in the various or contact the various kashrus organizations or look in their publications and see how they recommend cleaning it, and they will give you aces to clean it without vinegar if you do use the leaves. Again, everybody agrees still that the stalks are a better eitzah, but if you need to use the leaves or want to use the leaves for whatever reason, they do give you aces to kasher without vinegar. Okay, so I hope you're able to take away something from the words we spoke, and once again, they should be Leili Nishmas Dovid Sharfman, Zichron Livracha, and Bez Hashem, the whole mishpacha should continue to grow and to thrive and to be shoev, to draw on the memory of his greatness, and Bez Hashem, they should have nachas from every member of the mishpacha.
Thank you, Rabbi Friedman. It's now a privilege to introduce Rabbi Shimon Max, who was a brother-in-law of Reb Dovid. He is the Rosh Yeshiva of Mesivta Beis Dovid in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and he was obviously very close to Reb Dovid. He'll share with us Divrei Zikaron to inspire us to hopefully emulate the ways and the drachim and the pathways of Reb Dovid. Rabbi Max, please.
B'shus, the Rosh Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim of North Miami Beach. It's not easy to say Divrei Zikaron for my brother-in-law, Reb Dovid Zatzal, as it intensifies the pain of the great loss. Reb Dovid was an exceptional father, husband, Rebbe, and friend, who was an unusual Talmud Chacham with exceptional midos, who ultimately metamorphosed into a malach. If we think about Dovid Zatzal and become inspired by him, it will be a schus for him. In Shmuel Aleph, it brings down the story of Shmuel HaNavi's mother Chana, who was in distress because she had not bared children after a number of years of marriage. And Elkanah, her husband, could not understand why she was in so much pain, to the extent that she had no interest in eating. It's hard to believe that a Navi Hashem, who Elkanah was, could not understand his wife's Chana's pain. It's not so easy to understand people. When you discussed anything with Dovid, he understood you. He lived the issue with you. He daiged with you. He took your issue personal. When the Mesilas Yesharim says that when someone asks you for advice, you're obligated to give that person the exact same advice as you would do yourself. Mamish, as he says. I assume it was no big deal for Dovid because your issue became his issue. In this week's parsha, the Rosh Yeshiva pointed out that Rashi explains that the reason why the Yud was taken out of the word Nesiim is because Nesiim said that Klal Yisrael should first bring and donate all the material that they were able, and then they, the Nesiim, would cover the entire remainder necessary for the Mishkan. The Shiva pointed out that of course the Nesiim did this as they felt it was the best way to inspire everyone else in Klal Yisrael to bring. And then, the way the Rosh Yeshiva said, they'll give a blank check. But in truth, the Torah says, by taking out the Yud, that the Torah is implying that there was a drop of laziness that seeped in to the Nesiim subconsciously. They didn't realize this, that brought out a bad judgment by the Nesiim to come to this decision. Even though they were trying to do the right thing, but a subconscious negia of laziness can seep into the most lofty of people trying to perform a most lofty act in the most lofty way. Dovid was such an ish emes that helped him see clearly as to what he himself should do and did, and how he was able to advise so many who came to seek his advice. I remember saying over a svara to him from someone in regard to Dinei Mominus, and with such a clarity, he didn't have to say much, but I understood Reb Dovid's position and how right Dovid was. When we first started the Cherry Hill Yeshiva, he took a very personal interest, as it was an issue of mine. I discussed the whole idea with Dovid, and he suggested I call his cousin the Chazan in the community, a choshev person, well respected and influential in Cherry Hill, a Marbitz Torah. In the very beginning of the relationship, Chazan Horowitz secured 2.5 acres of prime real estate with a very large home on the property for the yeshiva, from also a distinguished mishpacha, the lands of mishpacha. I can't remember, but I believe that Dovid called his father Zatzal for us directly, Rabbi Benjamin Sharfman, as he was known, and his Rebbitzin, who were both so helpful to the yeshiva. In a sense, father like son. Rabbi Benjamin Sharfman learned with many balabatim in Cherry Hill, in his home in Cherry Hill. And the balabatim were loyal talmidim of Rabbi Sharfman, Rabbi Benjamin Sharfman. So when Rabbi Sharfman encouraged them to help the yeshiva, of course they did, in amazing ways. Dovid was extremely smart, well educated, and could have chosen any field of parnasa. And Alpi Derech HaTeva could have been very successful, but chose to be a Marbitz Torah. I still remember the night before, when Rebbitzin Shifra and Dovid Zatzal were moving, I remember thinking to myself, why are you so excited? You are not an out-of-towner. You are from Brooklyn like myself. How could you be so excited moving to a real out-of-town city like Miami was at that time? But he just wanted to help people in the best way possible, which is to teach Torah, as he loved to help people. And then Dovid metamorphosed into Mamish, a Malach. And as the Chovos HaLevavos writes, that sometimes Hashem brings difficulties to tzaddikim, so that the Hamon Am can learn how to deal with challenges. Boy, how Dovid acted day in and day out in yeshiva, while being so sick, yet so positive and full of bitachon. And then Hashem put his prize Eved Ne'emon on display for everyone to see at Yaki and Rachi's chasana. How a person can experience so much pain and weakness, and yet be so full of courage, bitachon, and so much simcha for everyone to see. What a lesson that was. The pasuk in this week's parsha says, "Vayas B'Tzalel es ha'aron," and Rashi writes, because B'Tzalel was moiseh nefesh for the Aron. According to the Sifsei Chachamim, it means that even though B'Tzalel made the Aron all by himself, that would not be enough to call the Aron made by B'Tzalel, but rather it's B'Tzalel's Mesiras Nefesh. And hence, Vayas B'Tzalel es ha'aron. How much Mesiras Nefesh did Dovid have for the yeshiva he helped build from its formative years to the beautiful Makom Torah that it is? The Bachrim thought it was normal to be driven to or from the airport in the middle of the night. As an example, the Mesiras Nefesh to build such a beautiful family, l'shem u'l'siferes. Each one of the children, so beautiful, full of midos tovos, with ahavas haTorah and chesed. The Ramban explains that the reason why the pasuk refers to all the chachamim who built the Mishkan as those who uplifted their hearts, their spirit, it's because they needed an almost brazenness to tell Moshe that they can do it. Build the Mishkan. And all the intricacies involved. It was not an easy malacha to perform. It couldn't even be learned or studied. It could only be something that you felt you could do in your bones. It required, as the Ramban writes, Vayigba libo b'darkei Hashem. The feeling of, I can do it. Hashem is with me. Full of bitachon and confidence. This was another special midah of Dovid Zatzal. His Rebbetzin Shifra is the same in this regard. Even with the loss of her husband, Harav Baruch Dovid Aryeh Zatzal, Dovid, she carries the mishpacha with superhuman koiches, with a strong feeling of bitachon. Vayigba liboy b'darkei Hashem. She too is a tremendous chizik and example for all of us. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to give her the koiches, continuing the beautiful derech that she, together with her saintly husband, Harav Baruch Dovid Aryeh ben Harav Nosson Doiv Zatzal, forged. Tehei Zichrei Baruch.